All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Chapter 9, which is Police Behavior and Misconduct. Now, I'm going to warn you, we got two videos this week, and both of them are pretty long, but there's a reason for that. So, police behavior and decision making may be, in my opinion, the most important topic we will cover this semester. What police officers do, why they do it, how they choose to do it, right? Those three things are at the center of pretty much every policing controversy. If you think about all the things that people argue about with policing or the problems they identify with policing, all of them can be traced back pretty much to decision making and behavior, right? So this is really, really important. This is kind of at the crux of all things policing, right? Is decision making and behavior. So we're also going to talk about some misconduct, but the first video is going to all be about behavior, discretion, decision making, that sort of thing. Okay, so there's two main perspectives when you're talking about police behavior: universalistic and particularistic. Universalistic perspective looks at things or the ways that officers are similar. Okay, particularistic perspective looks at the way that officers differ from one another. So if you're talking about universalistic research, you're talking about sociological, psychological, organizational, right? You're talking about those kind of perspectives when you're talking about universalistic. So the sociological perspective focuses on the context within which the police officers are hired, trained, and in which their encounters with citizens take place. So because of training and experience, police officers often will view situations in a certain or particular way, and then they act according to how they were trained or what they've learned based on their experience. So much of the research from this perspective is focused on the external and internal factors that influence an officer's discretion and decision making. The psychological perspective is concerned with the police personality. Officers may have a certain personality prior to becoming an officer, and then it may change due to their experiences from policing. But research in this perspective is very similar to the nature versus nurture argument. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. So is nature, like what occurs naturally, is that more important, or is it how someone was raised? So is it the genetic makeup of a person, like their personality, or is it their influences that have nurtured them and raised them along the way? So which is more important? But that's kind of the focus of psychological. So do the officers' values and attitudes stem from their upbringing or from their experiences after becoming an officer? It's often been thought that experience since becoming an officer were more important. But some of that has kind of started changing a little bit. Some of that thought, as more research has been done, some of the thinking on that has changed a little bit. Okay. Organizational perspectives suggest that organizational factors, whether they're formal, informal, or institutional, play an important role in police behavior. So formal aspects are how the organization structures the police work. What's the workload? What's their schedule like? What is the organization like? How does the organization influence what the police are doing? Informal aspects are mostly like police culture, right? And of course, that's always a topic with the media. Police culture and then subculture. So the police culture is their own set of beliefs and values that are shared by officers, kind of universally. That's kind of the police culture. Now, within that police culture, there's also police subcultures. So that's a culture within a culture. And those are usually like working groups, shifts, people that work together. And then institutional factors concern how the organization adapts to its environment. So things like efficiency and effectiveness, those things are sometimes secondary to what powerful actors want. So secondary to what like maybe the mayor wants, or if there's other respected police organizations, like what they say is important. Okay, sometimes those things are more important than actually efficiency or effectiveness. Excuse me, my gosh. Okay, one more quick word about culture. It's important to remember that all types of occupations have cultures. Okay, doctors have a culture. Mechanics have a culture. Like all these occupations have a culture. So it's not just that the police have their own culture. Like all occupations have a culture. The problem people have is what sometimes is part of the police culture or the police subculture. All right, particularistic perspectives. These often focus on types of police classification schemes or like different types of officers or styles of policing. So how do police officers differ from one another in what they do, okay, or how they approach their jobs, those sorts of things. Much of the early police research, like from the 1970s, focused on this. And it's interesting, if you go back and read some of these early studies, some of these typologies, like they still hold. Even going on 50 years, or even more, 60 years, some of these studies, like these typologies, some of them are still, pretty dead on. So there's 5 main ways that police can differ from one another. First is their view of human nature. Should people be trusted? Should they not be trusted? Police cynicism is part of that. Second is their view of their role orientation. Okay, what does the officer believe their main role should be? Are they crime fighters, strictly? Or is it broader than that? What is their role within policing and the community? Like, how does this officer view their role? Third, officers view departmental and legal restrictions differently, which is why we have some of these problems we're currently having with the police. Some people don't view departmental restrictions as actually restrictions. They're just suggestions, right? Those sorts of things. Same with legal restrictions. Fourth, how the officer's clientele influences their beliefs and behaviors. So people like the outside influence of judges or groups like Mothers Against Drunk Driving, things like that. Finally is the relationship between management and peer group support. So this organizations are often have more ways that are set up more to punish rather than reward. So they're more set up to punish behavior than they are to reward actually good behavior, which then leads to this complex systems that are set up to punish officers, which then leads to distrust, strained officer-supervisor relationships, causes officers to seek comfort in their peer groups, which leads to these cultures and subcultures, and then, here we go with all the stuff. So something to think about. So as our departments have focused on community-oriented policing and other police reforms, right? We've talked about some of this. They're concerned with making sure they hire the right kind of officers, which makes this question of nature-nurture even more important. So do an officer's characteristics stem from socialization practices within the department, or are they present prior to the person becoming an officer? Because those are two very different questions. If it's one, then it doesn't matter as much who you hire. You can turn them into what you want. But if it's the other, then it very much matters who you hire prior to that. Okay, so really getting into that is really going to be the crux of the issue. Socialization theory states that officer behavior is more determined by work experiences and their peers rather than their pre-employment attitudes. So broadly speaking, when you're talking about socialization, there's 2 main socialization processes, formal and informal. Now there's lots of different kinds of socialization, but broadly speaking, there's these 2, formal and informal. So formal socialization is what occurs because of the selection process, because of training, department policies, procedures. Okay, those are all formal things that influence police behavior. Informal socialization takes place when the new recruits interact with the older, more experienced officers, and then, as you can guess, that information may contradict with what they had been taught formally. Okay, so there's there's 4 main stages of socialization. So, pre-entry choice. Okay, most people that go into policing choose that. Most people don't end up in policing. Some people do, but most people go into policing because they choose that path for themselves. Admittance and introduction is the next stage. That includes the academy. Third stage is the encounter. That's when recruits begin to interact with the public and they They start interacting with training officers and other officers. And then the final stage is continuous metamorphosis. That's when recruits adjust to the realities of policing. Okay, they learn, that a lot of policing is tedious, and you deal with these routine problems with just a few exciting moments mixed in. It's not like you see on TV where you're just running Mach 12 with your hair on fire all the time, right? Most of it's handling just kind of routine calls. Okay, predispositional theory states that the officer's behavior is explained by the characteristics, values, and attitudes they had before they became an officer. So the book lists 8 central principles of the research for that theory. To save time, I'm not going to talk about all 8 of them individually, but essentially it says that police officers generally have similar attitudes and values, and there's little that can change this. And those come from people that choose to become police officers. They're already similar in their attitudes and values before they become police officers. So if you think about this, there are people that say that this is a problem, and it may be. But if you think about it, many occupations are this way. Okay, think about kindergarten teachers. Do kindergarten teachers have similar attitudes and values? Are they very similar? Of course, right? Or elementary school teachers. Or think about any job and think about the people that are in that job. Are they similar? Now, is that because certain types of people choose certain types of jobs? Or is it because those jobs turn them into certain kinds of people? Right? Everyone focuses on the police all the time, but take a minute and think about other jobs. This is a pretty common thing across occupations. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of these early studies now. I'm not going to talk about all of them. There's a bunch of them in there, so read them all. They're all pretty interesting and important, but I'm going to focus on J.Q. Wilson and Craig. So J.Q. Wilson found that differences in policing styles essentially revolved around how they handled order maintenance activities, and he created 3 typologies. So the first was the watchman style, and police have much latitude in how they handle order maintenance. So officers kind of devise their own way to handle these situations. In the service style, the police see themselves as providing service to the community. This style is much more easily implemented when you have homogenous communities where everyone is very, very similar, and there's broad agreement about how the police should handle certain situations. And then a legalistic style is the police try to enforce the law in all situations, hopefully by writing a ticket or making an arrest. Crank has done a lot of research on police culture, and he found that police culture emerges as a response to their daily routines. So to understand police behavior, you have to understand the physical context within which they operate. So he determined that police culture was organized around these 4 central principles. First was coercive territorial control. So the police are trained to control their territories, which is their beats, right? They're trained to control that. That's their territory. It's up to them to control that. Second principle is this unknown. Police work is unpredictable. Situations often have outcomes that are outside of their control and could be dangerous. The third is solidarity. The danger and unpredictability of police work creates strong bonds between officers. And the greater the conflict is with outside forces, the more the police turn inwards in solidarity and joining together. The fourth is loose coupling. So this refers to the relationship between the police and the organization. So the police develop strategies and tactics to protect themselves when department goals and procedures are perceived to undermine their ability to do their work. Sometimes policies and procedures sound great, but they're not really easy to do or able to be implemented on the street. So the officers come up with kind of workarounds, if you will. So they're loosely coupled with the organization. Okay, tight coupling would be organization says jump, the police say how high. Loosely coupled is it's not quite so tight. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, there's also this belief that there's one universal police culture, and that's not true either. Now, are there similarities? Of course. There are certainly similarities. But there's not this one kind of single universal police culture throughout the entire country and across every department. It doesn't work that way. So why does any of this matter? Well, it matters because all these influences officer decision making and discretion. Okay? And officers are routinely presented with questions, okay, and decisions they have to make. Like, if you think about a police officer's shift, they work an 8-hour shift. They're continuously making decisions. Now, some of them may not really make any difference. Do I go right? Do I go left? Maybe it doesn't matter. But they're constantly making decisions the entire time. But when it comes to actually acting, there's two main decisions. Okay, should I intervene? First of all, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should leave it alone. But if I do, what should I do? Okay, so should I do something? And then if I decide to do something, what should I do about it? Okay, but again, think about all the decisions they have to make every shift. Constantly making decisions. All right, so there's 4 broad categories of factors that influence police decision making: organizational, neighborhood, or community, situational, and then the officer or the individual. Organizational factors are those that are related to how the police organization impacts the officer's decision making. So we're talking about things like bureaucratic structure, okay? The rules and regulations that are inherent in bureaucracies, right? We already learned about organizational structure, right? So specialization, that has an impact on police officer decision making. Things are usually very strict because of how bureaucracies are structured. You know, they're built to influence police behavior. The whole point of policies and procedures is to restrict officer behavior, to control it. That's the whole point of policies and procedures. Okay, other organizational things such as like the characteristics of their assignments, how often they make them change shifts, their beats, all those sorts of things, or organizational influence on officer decision making. And discretion can change based on their assignment characteristics. All right, so neighborhoods or communities also influence decision making. 2 neighborhoods are rarely the same. Okay, so if you think about all the various components of neighborhoods, demographic characteristics such as race, gender, poverty levels, all those things influence police decision making. Another thing to remember too, in addition to those, neighborhoods sometimes have tolerances for certain types of behaviors, and the police may allow some types of victimless type crimes to occur with the neighborhood's blessing. You know, and that happens sometimes when the police are trying to work with the neighborhoods. If the neighborhoods want some low-level kind of victimless stuff to happen, sometimes the police let that happen, in an effort to try to work together with these neighborhoods. So all neighborhoods are different, and they all have their own. Each neighborhood, like I say, has their own personality, and the police become part of that personality. There's also situational characteristics that influence police behavior. If you break down any situation into parts, you'll find that there are many different components. Okay, and each of those components can influence the situation. Each of those components can influence the situation. So first, mobilization. What do the police do when they enter the situation? How are they entering it? Are they being proactive? How many officers are they bringing? All those types of things. Suspect and complainant demeanor are both important factors that influence officer discretion. Okay, disrespect toward the officer may be met with more harsh treatment. Arrests are more common in both misdemeanor and felony situations when a complainant wants an arrest to be made. Challenges to authority are met with harsher treatment, but challenges can occur across a continuum. Okay, but challenges increase the officer's sense of danger, and then they act accordingly. Like, not every challenge is the same, right? It's on a continuum. But challenges to authority, and as they increase, that increases the officer's sense of danger, and then they're going to act accordingly. Race has also been found to influence police behavior, but the results of the why about why this occurs has been mixed. The discussion of does it, that's kind of past. Like, everybody pretty much agrees that race does, but the why is not nearly so clear. Is it because of demeanor? Is it situational characteristic? It's also known that minorities are more likely to be stopped by the police. But again, the why is not always so clear. Is it racist police officers? It's possible in some situations, but probably not on a nationwide scale. Okay? And are there racist police officers? Of course, there are. But it seems unlikely that there would be that many that could impact this on a nationwide level. Is it something like cognitive stereotyping, where the police believe that minorities are more likely to have guns and drugs? Could be. Is it because predominantly minority neighborhoods often have higher crime rates and more calls for service, so therefore more police are stationed in those neighborhoods, because those are the kinds of things that police use to determine how many officers should be assigned to neighborhoods, which then leads to more stops of minorities simply because both parties are in the same place, right? Are there more stops of minorities because you have more police officers in minority neighborhoods because there's more calls for service in See what I mean? The why is not as clear. They still haven't really figured out for sure the why on why these things are happening. My take on it is that there's probably a combination of the three. It's probably not one or the other. It's probably some combination. And whether they can ever tease that out to really figure out how it's happening and which ones, it may not ever happen. All right, so gender also influences police behavior. Women are less likely to be arrested than men as long as they act like officers believe a woman should. Offender age also influences the police. Juveniles are more likely to receive sanctions, especially in socially and economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. However, anybody that has kids knows that juveniles will often display more disrespect toward anyone, right? But probably especially the police, which then you fall into this demeanor thing, right? Which can then also influence how they're treated. The relationship between the suspect and the complainant has also been found to influence police behavior. If the relationship is close, like spouses or like parent-child, the police may be reluctant to take action because it may be difficult to get testimony. And also, people then oftentimes will change their mind. They'll ask for charges to be dropped after they make an arrest. Like, there's oftentimes issues post-arrest that sometimes officers think it's just easier to not take any action at all. Seriousness of the offense is one of the most important factors that influences police behavior. Okay, so the more serious, the more likely they are to take action. Right, so felonies, obviously, if a felony versus a misdemeanor, they're more likely to take action on the felony. All right, mental state of the citizen influences police behavior. Now, there are a variety of reasons why police would be more likely to arrest someone with mental illness. One reason is that the police, as a general rule, are not equipped to handle someone with mental illness. They don't know what else to do. It's a perfect situation of this is happening and someone needs to do something about it. And the police are the only ones that are available to do something about it. And even though they're not the best people to do it, they need to do something. So that's a problem. And it's really been brought to the forefront here lately that the police are thrust into these situations. They're not prepared, right? They're not trained. They don't know how to handle these kind of things, but they have to do something. So what has started happening is some police departments have begun creating crisis intervention teams. Now, these teams are pretty cool. These are teams made up of law enforcement and social service people, counselors, things like that. and it really has a positive results. Now, it doesn't have positive results everywhere. This is very, very like the right people have to be involved in these things. If you don't have the right people on these teams, this is not going to work. But this is really a kind of cool thing that's really come about the last 10 years or so that I really hope takes off. Like, I really think there's a lot of good that can come from these kind of teams. Where the offense takes place also influences behavior. Okay, police are more likely to respond more harshly in public settings than a private setting, because in a public setting there's other people around, right? And they have to appear that they're in control of the situation. And then you put the presence of others, that's your last category. So the presence of other officers and bystanders makes the police slightly more likely to use punitive sanctions. So, let me finish up. So it's been found that single officers working alone act differently than when there's two or more officers together. So think about all these causes I've just talked about for police behavior. How many of them are present only by themselves? Right? Almost none of them. Right? If you think about it, all these things are all kind of present at the same time. So for someone to say, well, the police do this because of this one factor, well, that's probably not accurate. Right? All these things are interacting all at the same time and within a different context. So in one context, it may be this thing that influences their behavior or decision making. But over here, it's something different. Okay, so anytime you hear that this is what it is, like that's probably not accurate. So really think about these for a little bit, and think about how they might interact at the same time. But then you also bring in this. We're going to talk about next. We're talking about officer factors. Right? Some of those things are going to influence police behavior. Factors like education, age, experience, all those things impact an officer's decision making. Age and experience is hard to separate because they're often, really hand in hand. Many people start policing at a young age, so as they get older, they're also more experienced. Younger officers that are less experienced may be more punitive, and ready to dole out more sanctions. But older officers probably do better work. And I can speak to this. I never was what you would call an old officer, but I was in law enforcement for about 10 years. And I certainly worked differently in year 10 than I did in year 1. In just about every facet of what I did, how I interacted with people, how I talked to people, how I went about, issuing citations or making arrests, everything I did was very, very different 10 years later than it was in year 1. Officer race may also impact their behavior. So the prevailing wisdom was that if the police force became more diverse, then all the police's problems will be solved. However, it's not that easy, and it's difficult to kind of tease out the relationship of officer race to their behavior. They've found that officers of color are often more respected in their African American communities, but they also have been found to be more stricter and act more punitively in African American communities. There are, of course, reasons why this may be. One may be that this is where African American officers are being assigned. Why are they more punitive with African American citizens? Well, that's because they're in African American communities. So there's a lot of factors, again, that are all kind of coming together to influence this behavior. So the race of an officer does have an impact on behavior. That is pretty well settled. But how that occurs is complex and usually contextual. Gender also impacts police behavior. Women may be less aggressive in their use of coercion. But it's not as dramatic a difference as was previously believed. It used to believe it was very distinct between women and men, but it's really not that different. Okay, I know that was a lot. But like I said, officer decision-making may be the most important thing we talk about in this class. Why do the police do what they do? Okay, so I'm going to make another video about deviance. It'll be shorter than this one. So please do your readings, finish your assignments, and please let me know if you have questions.